Hello lovelies, I'm True Crime Caitlin and welcome back to my channel and another true crime video. We're just gonna jump straight into today's case, so please check the description box for my disclaimer and for any trigger warnings. So for today's case, we're going to talk about one of Scotland's most evil killers who was dubbed the Beast of Birkenshaw, Peter Manuel. Peter Thomas Anthony Manuel was born in Manhattan, New York on the 15th of March 1927. He was the second out of 3 children to his parents, Samuel and Bridget Manuel. Peter had a brother named James who was 3 years older than him, and then he also had a sister named Teresa who was 7 years younger than him. Their parents were Scottish immigrants who had made the move over to America hoping for a better life and to follow the American dream. Samuel would work in a car factory where Bridget worked as a domestic servant. The family briefly lived in Detroit, Michigan for a while before Samuel actually got really poorly, and this affected how much he was able to work. This, along with a lack of funds, forced the Manuels to move back to the UK in 1932 when Peter was just 5 years old. Peter had a very happy, normal, loving childhood. He did, however, suffer mild bullying in his new school as Peter spoke with an American accent, but as he grew older, his accent began to change. He was obsessed with American gangster novels and films, and he would try and imitate being an American gangster, so he would dress in very smart suits and he would put on his American accent. In 1937, the family are now living in Coventry, and this is when Peter first started getting in trouble with the police. His first encounter was when he was only 11 years old, when he had broken into a chapel and stole the money from the collections box. This was the start of a life of petty crime. He spent many years in and out of approved schools and borstalls, which is just like a youth prison, for things such as theft, breaking and entering, vandalism and just random acts of violence. Whenever Peter and his accomplice, whoever he was committing these crimes with, broke into houses and collieries, they would absolutely ransack it. Cupboards, drawers and wardrobes would just be emptied and flung. Crockery and vases would be smashed. They would break open tins of food and smash eggs onto the carpet and kind of grind them into the carpet. They would rip down curtains, they would put windows through, and they really went all out, just doing the most, trying to cause as much damage as they could. At 15 years old, Peter broke into a house in the middle of the night and awoke a sleeping woman by beating her over the head with a hammer. And for this he spent some time in a Leeds prison. During Peter's incarceration here, his family moved from Coventry to Lanarkshire, Scotland, after their home was bombed during the war. When Peter was released, he also made the move. Any hope that Samuel or Bridget had, thinking that this could be a new start for Peter, was very quickly squashed. In 1946, Peter attacked 3 women on 3 separate occasions. These women included a nurse he had beat up, a mother who he had also beat up, and a 26-year-old woman who he had raped while beating her head against the pavement. For this, Peter appeared at the High Court in Glasgow and was charged with rape. He spent the next 8 years in Peterhead prison. During his time here, prison officers would say that Peter was exceptionally intelligent and very well read, but he was also very cocky, arrogant, and he was known to gloat about his crimes. He was released from Peterhead prison in October 1953. He is now 26 years old. Upon his release, Peter did make very small positive changes, which gave his parents hope that he had changed. He began to work for the gas board and he even got engaged to a woman named Anne O'Hara who worked as a bus conductress. The couple were quickly engaged and planned to marry on the 30th of July 1955. However, Anne called off their marriage after differences in religion, the main factor being that Peter refused to attend mass. The break of his relationship infuriated Peter. He hated not being in control, so he unfortunately took his anger out on 29-year-old Mary McLaughlin. He abducted Mary at knife point and dragged her into a nearby field where he made threats to her, saying that he was going to kill her and decapitate her. Mary would later describe this ordeal, saying that Peter growled in pleasure as she cried and pleaded to be let go, when out of nowhere he just stopped and sat back away from her. And this is when Mary was able to make her escape. For this abduction and attempted rape of Mary, Peter received no punishment, as at court he defended himself and was given a not proven verdict. I can't imagine how this would have made poor Mary feel. She was brave enough to report it and come forward, say what happened, face him in court, all for him to be let off. On New Year's Eve 1956, 17-year-old Anne Nealons had dropped into her friend's house and was waiting for them so they could all go down the village to go to a dance together. After waiting for a while and putting on some makeup, she decided to just head down into the village herself and left her friend's house at about 6 p.m. Come midnight, Anne began her walk home when she unfortunately crossed paths with Peter. She was chased for at least 400 yards before she was caught. Investigators concluded that she had been chased due to footmarks left in the mud that indicated chasing. Peter caught up to Anne and ripped off her clothes, viciously raping her before using a length of iron to bludgeon her to death. The beating with this iron was so brutal and aggressive that Anne's skull had been caved in and blood, bone and brain matter were found all around Anne's body. It took 2 days for Anne to be reported missing by her parents. When she didn't come home on the night of the dance, they had just assumed that she had slept out at a friend's house. Another 2 days later, 4 days after her murder, 2 golfers looking for lost golf balls found Anne's body in the Calderwood estate, which was relatively close to the golf course, but was also close to the gas board site, which, if you remember, Peter worked for them. News of the brutality of Anne's murder horrified this very small community, and police desperately wanted to find the perpetrator. During the investigation into Anne's murders, one of her shoes was found in close proximity to a friend's house, which made investigators believe that she had been running to her friend's house for help. Her friends still hold guilt to this day that they didn't see or hear anything from that night which could have helped save Anne. Police spoke with the foreman of the gas board, who told them that one of his employees had previously been in prison for rape and he had come into work with scratches on his face. Obviously, police knew of Peter and his history, so he was very quickly named a person of interest and set out to question him. Peter was questioned regarding these quite severe scratches, and he explained them away, stating that he had been in a pretty bad street fight in Glasgow and that's how he had got the scratches. When asked his whereabouts on the night of Anne's murder, Peter provided police with a solid alibi. He was with his dad all night and Samuel corroborated this for him. Officers just had this gut feeling that Peter was involved, but with no witnesses, no physical evidence and a seemingly solid alibi, they couldn't arrest or detain him. Other leads that were investigated around Anne's murder ultimately led to nothing and no one was arrested. On the 15th of September, police received a report of a break-in in the Bothwell area. This break-in had all of Peter's trademarks: the thrown food, the broken furniture, muddy boot prints, etc. The evening after, another break-in was reported in the Burnside area, which showed all of these trademarks again, along with stolen cash and jewellery. On the 17th of September 1956, 16-year-old Vivian Watt had been spending the day with her friend having a look around the shops in Glasgow. She returned to her home in the High Burnside area, where she joined her mum, Marriott Watt, and her auntie, Margaret Brown, in listening to the radio. Her dad, William Watt, wasn't at home this night as he was on a little fishing getaway, so all of the women spent some girl time together. The next morning, the Watts' housekeeper turned up to the house to start a shift when she noticed something unusual. A glass panel on the front door had been smashed and all the curtains in the house were closed. This was unusual enough that the housekeeper actually contacted the police. Both Marion, who was 45, and Margaret, who was 41, were found in the bed that they shared, having both been shot in the head. Vivian was found in her bedroom upstairs, which was found completely turned upside down. It was clear that poor Vivian had suffered from a ferocious beating before having her clothes ripped off and also being shot in the head. Miraculously, Vivian was still alive after all of this, but she unfortunately died shortly before help arrived that morning. Unlike Anne's murder, police very quickly made an arrest for these triple murders. They arrested William Watt. William was very well known in the community. He ran a successful bakery and was rumoured to be a little bit of a ladies' man, which apparently could have been enough motive for murder. Like I said earlier, William was actually away for the night fishing, and investigators didn't dispute this. They theorised that William had drove around 90 miles that night to annihilate his family and then return back to his trip. To me, it does seem a little bit outlandish, but that's what they theorised at the time, and I guess it wasn't impossible. Their theory of this began to strengthen when they had two witnesses come forward saying that they saw William that night. The first witness was a ferryman who said to have seen William on the Renfrew ferry, and the second said he passed him in the car on Loch Lomond side. Both of these witnesses positively ID'd William from a lineup, which really began to make this theory sound more believable. William was soon charged with these three murders and was sent to Barlinnie prison. Coincidentally, while William was at Barlinnie prison, Peter was also incarcerated there because of some break-ins. Within prison, William was kind of the one where everyone knew him, they knew the case, and he was getting all kinds of attention, which Peter loathed. He hated that William was essentially taking all the credit for his crime and was considered a more dangerous man than him. So because of this, Peter began to write letters to William's defence team saying that he knew who committed the crime and even included details that weren't public knowledge, such as one of the women being shot twice. And this really did help the case against William collapse. Someone knew details he didn't. He had no real motive to slaughter his entire family. The petrol levels in his car didn't drop overnight on the night of the murder, which they would have if he drove over 90 miles. The hotel where he stopped was thoroughly searched and they did not find one drop of blood or a single piece of evidence. Because he didn't kill his family. So after 67 days of being incarcerated, William Watt was released. On the 28th of December 1957, 17-year-old Isabel Cook had planned to go out dancing with her boyfriend Douglas in Uddingston. They had planned to meet on the main street, but when Isabel didn't show, Douglas thought that she had just changed her mind, so he just went on with his night. But when Isabel didn't return home the next day, her parents really began to worry. They searched the area themselves looking for her, they spoke to all of her friends, but when they were turning up nothing, they contacted the police. Police began an extensive search. They searched the nearby River Calder, where they found a bag and a shoe, both of which belonged to Isabel, but no trace of Isabel herself. Again, no arrests were made for Isabel's disappearance/murder. One theory was that Isabel had been murdered and her body was dumped on a railway cart, and that's why they couldn't find her body. But again, that was just a theory. On the 3rd of January 1958, a young boy named David went to knock on his best friend's house, 10-year-old Michael Smart, to see if he was coming out to play. David knocked on and no one answered, so he just went home. The Smart family had planned to see the new year through with family away from home, so them not answering the door didn't really ring any alarm bells. David could have never known that the Smarts had actually changed their mind and were all laying dead inside their home. Early hours on New Year's Day, Peter had broken into the house of Peter, Doris and Michael Smart. He fatally shot all of the family members, but then actually proceeded to live in their house for several days. He ate food from their fridge, chilled out on their couch watching the telly. He fed and played with the family cat. He stole the family car, and he also stole cash from Mr. Smart, which aided in catching Peter. There is a very high likelihood that Peter was in the house on the morning when David went to knock on for Michael. David is so lucky to have been able to walk away from the house that day. Peter had actually used the family car that he had stolen to give a lift to a police officer who was assisting in trying to find Isabel Cook. Peter told this police officer that he thought they were looking in the wrong place. Police were notified about the Smarts when Mr. Smart didn't turn up to work, which was very unlike him. After discovering the bodies of the Smart family, Lanarkshire police realised they were in over their heads and were not making any progress. They began to link the murders and feared that they may have a serial killer on their hands. The force reached out and asked for help, and 2 Glasgow detectives joined the case. At the time Peter was at large, the whole of Scotland averaged at getting about 14 murders per year. So for this small community to have 8 murders in just 2 years was both terrifying and unheard of. For a long time, police had strongly suspected who the perpetrator was, but they just couldn't prove it. On the 14th of January 1958 at 6:45 AM, police arrived at Peter's house with a warrant. They searched the house from top to bottom, and although they didn't find anything linking him to the murder, they did find a bunch of stolen goods, which was enough to arrest him and his dad Samuel for theft. Police were convinced that they had their killer, but with no physical evidence and no real motive, they had to approach Peter in a different way. They left Peter alone in a cell to stew for hours on end. They didn't speak to him or entertain him in any way. When they finally sat down with him at around 3 PM, he was ready to bargain with the officers. He told them that he would provide information on unsolved crimes, where weapons were disposed of, where Isabel Cook was, on the condition that his father be released from the theft charge and that he wanted his parents to be there with him when he spoke. This was agreed, and soon Samuel and Bridget were there with him in the interview room. Bridget was extremely emotional and she was crying, pleading with Peter to just tell the whole truth. Peter went on to confess to all 8 of the murders from the past 2 years. He cried during his confession and stated that for some of the murders he had no memory of what happened. He took police to a field where he claimed to have buried Cook and just started to kind of roam around for quite a while. He was actually just roaming around for so long that one of the officers with him kind of snapped at him, saying like to stop wasting the time. And at this point Peter stopped dead in his tracks, turned around and said, quote, "I'm standing on her now." This area was searched, and on the 16th of January, the body of 17-year-old Isabel Cook was found. She showed clear signs of injury to her head. She was stripped naked, and it was concluded that she had died due to strangulation from her own bra. Peter's trial began on the 12th of May 1958 at Glasgow Crown Court, and this was the trial of the century. He was examined by many doctors, all of which who stated that he was a psychopath, but he was fit to stand trial. By day 10 of the trial, Peter had sacked his team and began to represent himself. He really tried to get his confession thrown out of evidence, but thankfully wasn't able to. The confession was really their main piece of evidence. I mean, they did have others, such as Peter knowing details about the crimes that went public. he showed officers where Isabel Cook's body was. And as I mentioned earlier, the cash that he stole from Mr. Smart really helped nail him. It turned out that Mr. Smart had only withdrawn these £5 notes very recently, and the notes were really new. So because they were so new, they were quite easy to spot and easy to remember. And Peter had been spending these brand new £5 notes in pubs in Glasgow. DNA evidence wasn't as such a big thing back there to prove his guilt with that, and physical evidence was sparse. So without this confession, there wasn't really a strong case against Peter. During the trial, while representing himself, Peter tried to spin all the blame for all the murders onto William Watt, the very man who he was jealous of in prison for getting all of the attention. The trial lasted 14 days and the jury took only 2 hours and 21 minutes to deliberate. They found Peter Manuel guilty for the murders of Vivian Watt, Marion Watt, Margaret Brown, Isabel Cook, Peter Smart, Doris Smart, and Michael Smart. And for the murder of Anne Nealons, he was found not guilty due to lack of evidence. This is absolutely heart-shattering for Anne's family and friends who know that Peter done this. He confessed to it, but was somehow still found not guilty. This just felt like such a blow to not just Anne, but everyone who knew her. On the 26th of May at 4:45 p.m, Peter was sentenced to death. Just over 6 weeks after his sentence, on the 11th of July 1958 at 8 a.m, Peter was sent to the gallows at Barlinnie prison. He was one of the last people to be executed here. His final meal was fish and chips with peas and tomatoes and a glass of brandy. 12 people attended to watch Peter hang. His last words to the executioner were, quote, "Turn up the radio and I'll go quietly." The execution took a total of 24 seconds to kill him. He was then buried in an unmarked grave in the prison's D block. Since his death, Peter has been accused of other murders. This includes the murder of a man named Sidney Dunn, who was 36 and a taxi driver in Newcastle upon Tyne. He was murdered on the 8th of December 1957. During the time that Sidney was murdered, Peter was actually in the Newcastle area attending a job interview, but by the time Sidney's body was found in the Northumberland moorlands, Peter was already back in Lanarkshire. The main reason that Peter was linked to Sidney's murder is because of a button that was found in Sidney's taxi. This button matched one of the buttons on a jacket that Peter had owned. Whether he was responsible for the murder is up to debate. Just as many people believe that he did do it as didn't. Some people say that the killer was a local man and that he was a Geordie. Others say that the killer had an Irish accent and Peter had a Scottish accent. Nevertheless though, 17 days after his execution, a coroner's jury ruled that Peter was Sidney's killer. And that is today's case. In his 31 years of life, Peter Manuel destroyed the lives of so many other people. I still can't get over that he was found not guilty for Anne Nealon's murder, and I really feel for her family. Let me know your thoughts about this case in the comment section. Thank you all so much for sitting and listening with me today. I have linked all of my social media in the description box if you want to go and follow me on any of my other platforms. I also talk about true crime cases on my TikTok account. I will have all of my source material down there as well. Again, thank you all so much. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you all on my next one.